All right, put it down in the back. Yeah. Yeah. Black African power was good, was happening, a well-organized lie. Defeats a disorganized truth every time. Woo-hoo-wee. Man, y'all already know what it is, man. It's GODKILLA in the house. And I'm coming to do what I got to do. And I'm going to do what I got to do. I'm standing tall. I'm standing strong. Hey, y'all know what it is, man. It's Bobby Bang up in here, man. What's good, family? Look, man, we got one of them power interviews, man. And, you know, we've been waiting to hear the side of Dr. Richard Currier, man. A whole conversation. You know what side we stand on around here. We stand on the side of scholarship, man. I see the chat is filling up, man. Mongo Slade, what's good, bro? What it do? What it do? What it do? I see the pseudo killers on deck. Miss Tiff, what it do? What it do? What it do? Lakeisha Dunn, pseudo killer army, what it do? What's going on, Adrian? What it do? What's up, D? I see you. Man, we want to get right into this interview, man. So look, let me go ahead and bring Richard on the stage. What's going on, Richard? How you doing, man? What it do?
Yeah, it's going well. Doing well tonight.
Yeah, we're going to have a good conversation, man. We was all in the front row seat in that debate you had, man. I'm glad you could actually, be on that platform. I think it helped add to the platform, man. That was a good conversation with you. I know you do a lot of debating, man, and We're gonna give out your information where people can get you, get you in on your channel, right? And maybe get you into some more debates because that's exactly what you like to do, man. And I always appreciate.
I actually hate debating, but I'm good at it, so I'll do it on
You
fire.
hate it, but you're good at it. Yeah, I'm gonna
That's 'cause I've
find
done
out
it
how
so
good
much.
you
I've
think you
so many
did.
years. But yeah.
Okay, all right, yeah. Well, you've been up against some big shots. You definitely been up against some big shots. Your last one was a good one. So let's get right into it, man. Let me ask you a question. So what's up with the atheism, Richard? What's good?
Yeah, that's how I kind of got into this community, right? Is my atheistic stuff. When I got into scholarship, for me it was the combination of Roman studies, which I realized I could use to benefit the atheist community by learning Latin and Greek and the origins of Christianity and the context and all that. But I also love the culture and I loved the study of history. By that point, I was crazy for it. So it was, two birds, one stone. And then I got involved in the secular web and eventually was editor-in-chief of that for several years. So that kind of got me into it. And really, like, I just got used to answering people's arguments, right? And saying, like, finding like the flaw in the argument, or even finding ways to make an argument better, and so on. So I got good at that. But at the same time, my mission has always been that it's not enough to be an atheist. I do see, like, I do really, really hate disinformation. And so combating disinformation of all kinds, like not just religious, but even political and so on, is a big thing of mine. But it's also, for me, important that we have a worldview, a coherent worldview that has an ethical component that we can all derive from the facts of the world as they are, right? Like, once you get rid of gods and superstitions and dogmas, what's left over, you can build a worldview out of that. And so that's been a big thing. So naturalism is another thing. That's one of the tracks that I've published in and that I write on my blog, and I've done it for decades. And so at the same time, I'm doing the ancient history stuff, criticism, origins of Christianity things, and a lot of other topics too. But those are the main two drivers of my profession and my interest base, really.
Okay, all right. Yeah, I catch a lot of heat for being an atheist. They just plainly flat out. It's not African to be an atheist. Yeah, I've heard this the whole time. I find it being funny. I do.
So before we went live, you mentioned that, and I had mentioned that immediately struck me as funny, because I'm also known as one of the weird, obscure things that I've done is I wrote an essay on Ty Solaren many decades ago. And the Ty Solaren community really appreciated that, like boosting his awareness in America and so on. And so they occasionally will invite me to their conferences. I've never been able to go yet, but they do. Now, for people who don't know who Ty Solaren is, so Ty Solaren was a famous atheist Nigerian nationalist, right? So, like, he was Nigerian. He lived in Nigeria. He founded a school in Nigeria. He was widely published in newspapers in Nigeria, and he would often have, like, arguments with Chinua Achebe, who would do the Christian side against his atheist side. And so, but he's famous, right? Like he's renowned in Nigeria, and his school is still thriving. It's still there. And there's still communities that still want to praise and remember him decades later. So to hear that it's not African to be atheist, when Ty Solaren is like, you can't get more atheist, you can't get more Nigerian, more African than Ty Solaren, and you can't get more atheist than Ty Solaren. So yeah, definitely Nigerian atheist of renown, and he's not the only one. You could certainly find more, but he's probably the most famous that you would run into in America.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, man. We'll definitely drop that name in the chat so people can kind of look him up. I think it's very important.
Yeah.
To actually put some emphasis on some great African thinkers. I find that to be very important. Now, Charles Darwin was a naturalist. What does that mean to you when you say you're a naturalist? What is meant by that?
Yeah, it means nature is all there is. So rejecting the supernatural. And even how you define natural and supernatural is one of the tasks of being a naturalist. Like, what do you mean by that? It ultimately means that matter, energy, and space-time, everything reduces to that. So mind is just an emergent property of a complex physical system. And so everything mental is that. So, and once you understand that, then you got to look at, well, what are the facts of the world that we can establish apart from traditions, apart from dogmas, apart from superstitions? What's left over? And then you derive everything from that: your politics, your ethics, your epistemology, and so on. And so as you build the whole worldview, the 5 Aristotelian categories are metaphysics, which is everything that you fill in the gaps after you've done physics, and then physics, which just means all sciences, so it includes biology and stuff. And then you have aesthetics, which is theory of beauty, like why are things beautiful and ugly, and why does that matter? What should we do about it? And then ethics, which is morality, and then politics, which is how do we regulate the use of power? And so to work out all of those and make them coherent and based on a foundation of facts, independent of superstition and legend and so on. That's naturalism, basically. And there's different, you can still, like any worldview, there's a lot of areas of debate that you can still have because nothing is known for certain. But I think that's where it's at. I think that's what we should be doing, is exploring that, debating that, and building the most accurate and defensible naturalism we can.
You know what I find very funny? That a lot of people, you find them in all creeds, different ethnicities. You find groups of people that are claiming that they want to be natural. We're not going to do this.
Oh,
want to be natural.
Yeah, good,
misuse of the word natural.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that.
That is a big issue. Yeah, I have a big peeve about that as well. I get this a lot from a lot of different angles, probably different from the ones that you've been dealing with. But I get it where people are saying, well, our politics or our ethics should be based on nature. And I'm going to go, no, nature's a crazy psychopath. Let's be following nature. And, they'll cite but nature gave us all these good things. Yeah, but look at all the crappy, horrible things that nature does and has given us too. Nature's a terrible guide. All of human civilization has been a long story of us fixing everything nature broke. Right. And coming up with better ways to think than nature gave us, better ways to be moral people than nature gave us, and so on. So I don't subscribe to the idea that we should do what's natural, even if you can figure out what that is. No, there's lots of ways that natural is bad. And I have often the issue with organic agriculture too, which is people think organic, no pesticides. No, they're using naturally sourced pesticides, which in many cases are worse. Right? They're still poisons, and they're still bad for the environment, right? And so it's that kind of thing, like this sort of deification of nature. I do find a problem with. I think we need to be more pragmatic about that. There are obviously lessons we can learn from nature, but there's also shit that's wrong with nature that we have to get around.
Absolutely. Yeah. Everything in nature is potentially a poison. That's for sure. And, people don't recognize that. So I'm like, man, come on.
Yeah.
As a study of it. So you talked about naturalism, and I heard the term metaphysical, and I was reading up a little bit. Metaphysical naturalism. That's interesting for me. I hadn't heard of that. What the hell is that? Metaphysical.
Okay. So the vocabulary has changed.
Okay.
So when I published my book, here's my book, Sense and Goodness Without God, A Defense of Metaphysical Naturalism.
Right.
Metaphysics was the term of art that you would use in the field of philosophy. Now, it just means what is your underlying basis of reality. But the term metaphysics also has used by Woo and New Age stuff to mean like spiritual or supernatural or stuff like that. That is not what we mean. They stole the word from Aristotle. Metaphysics literally just means after physics, because it was the book that you would read after the physics, because that's all it means.
Absolutely.
And the physics, in Aristotle's term, physics just means science. So it's all the sciences. So he did the physics, which is this is what the sciences tell us. Okay, now what do we have to infer about the world based on that? We can't do science with, but we can't prove it with science, but we can infer it from what we have. That's metaphysics, right? And so if you have a worldview, its foundation is always metaphysics. Now, since then, it's been 20 years, almost 20 years. The fashion in the field of philosophy has changed. The preference now is to use the word ontology, so ontological rather than metaphysical. That avoids the confusion with the New Age thing, but it means the same thing. Ontology is the nature of being. What does it mean to be, to exist? And that gets to the baseline. What is the foundation of reality? So ontology, it's not exactly identical to metaphysics, but in terms of the way people are using the word lately, it has kind of been like if I'd published this book now, I might say ontological naturalism rather than metaphysical naturalism, simply to avoid that confusion because of the way the language has changed.
That's interesting. I hadn't quite understood that. So ontology, I got you, and that's good. So as I was reading on your blog, I ran across one that really kind of piqued my interest. You was on a Garfield show, and you was talking about neo-paganism, and I was like, man, that's what they doing. That's exactly what they over there doing. And I say, man, it's based right in certain cultures, but it ain't based in what they think is based in, and I find that to be wild.
Yeah.
So
yeah, my encounter with that, it's funny because my encounter with that was with Scandinavian and European neo-paganism, which is
you say what? Say that again. Scandinavian.
Yeah, so like Swedish neo-paganism.
So it's not based in African black. It's not based.
No, it's based on Nordic religion, right? And so you've got stuff the Celts. You've got Celtic neo-paganism.
Wow.
You've got like Native American witchcraft-based neo-paganism in America. Neo-paganism in America is very multicultural, so they pull gods in from everywhere in all cultures. But yeah, neo-paganism is an actual thing. And it is when you're in anthropologists who study contemporary religion, you talk about neo-paganism. It's this term of the field. But when I hadn't really like had much contact with this sort of Egyptophilia, Egyptocentric views, where
Egyptomania.
Well, that can mean other things, but that can mean white people who are crazy for stealing Egyptian art products. But
that was original. That was the Mamma Mia eating the mummies. That was definitely original.
Yeah. So anyway, and I realized that modern Kemetism is it's just an Egyptian form of neo-paganism, and totally, it fits into that orbit. It can be explained that way in a lot of ways.
So how much of a connection to the ancient Egyptians would you think it would be? If you're trying to learn about the ancient Egyptians, would you suggest a person go into neo-paganism or Kemeticism? How close is it to what?
No.
What do you think?
just as I wouldn't recommend going to Swedish neo-pagan festival to learn about ancient Nordic religion. No, it depends. If you want to do it for reasons other than scholarship, right? Like, there's something about the aesthetics, there's something about the spirituality or the way that it helps you organize your understanding of the world. As long as it stays in contact with reality, it's just another form of cultural community. It's when you start turning it into, very grandiose claims about the nature of the world, or the nature of history, or things like that, then it can become problematic. And once you start using it as a raft for disinformation, that's a problem. But you can use it as an intro. Like if you get into that community, that can get you excited to go look at real Egyptological literature rather than, the kind of stuff that gets circulated in that community.
Okay. All right. So, since you're not actually aware of it, we watched the debate, right? And the main issue that came up over and over and over again, this man ain't produced no sources. I was like, wait a minute. I said, you can give verbal sources. Okay. You don't have to. I said, I think you positioned yourself. You showed, I believe, 4 of your books. It's 3 or 4 of your books, right?
Yeah.
And then you said you can also go to my blog, and you explained how it's not enough room.
Right. How you can get the sources. I actually, in my slides, when there were a lot of sources in there as well. So that's also true. But I find that argument disingenuous.
Okay.
Now, yes, it is true that I should be able to produce the sources. I don't have to produce them immediately. But I can say, yeah, I've got sources. I'll give you the bibliography, right? I should be able to do that, which I did, right? So when I wrote the article after the post-debate article, I put a ton of bibliographies in there for people who really want to do this. But in a debate, like an oral debate where you're time limited, you need to challenge the claim, not the source, right? So if you're going to say you don't have a source, do you mean you're saying that this claim is false? Like you got to commit, right? Are you challenging the claim, and you need evidence for the claim, and then you can produce it in the debate? Like that's how you would do that. And so you would do that for a specific claim. You wouldn't just say, I need sources. Sources for what? Like, can you be more specific? What and why do you need the sources? Like, do you doubt the claim? Like, which is fine, but is that what you're saying, or are you merely annoyed that I didn't hit this technical point that you want, as I didn't have a bibliography on screen for you? And so that, I think, is the important thing in a debate. Is like, it is important to be able to provide sources and evidence. But when you're saying that as an argument, are you doing it honestly or disingenuously? Like, are you actually challenging the claim, or do you admit the claim is true, so you really don't need the sources, and you're just complaining, right? And so that's the kind of thing that I'm more interested in getting at, is like, what is it that you're actually challenging, and why are you challenging that? And then, of course, yeah, bringing up the sources will be one way to establish that your claims are true.
I just want to make sure I'm not delusional. I could have sworn you said it. You did it a couple times. You said these are my books.
Yeah.
Right. And you said also have a blog. Right. And
Yep,
the sources are in there. I could have sworn you said there's not enough space here.
Yeah.
Am I messing
several
it
times
up?
I said that. Yeah.
I just want to make sure I'm not messing it up.
Yeah,
so
yeah,
at
you
that
are
point,
not. Yeah.
okay. So at that point, anybody saying that you didn't have sources or a way to get you the sources is being disingenuous.
Yeah.
And they cheered to the top of their lungs with that one. I was like, really? Like, there's more than one way to produce a source. Now, here's another issue about sources. What you mean? He showed his book for sources. I was like, well, when you're an expert and you're writing on the subject, you can produce sources. And sometimes you're actually the source of the claim. That's what you get in academia. But go ahead.
Part of the point of the books, right, is to aggregate sources for you, right? It's like, the reason you would look at a book like that, to reference a book, one of my books, is that they're chock full of sources. Like, if you want to go to a massive list of sources, that's what the books are for. Like, that's why we publish these books. They're not just claims. They're catalogs of source material and evidence with citations, right? And you know, academics like myself, that's one of the most valuable things in a monograph. So, like, I will praise monographs. I don't agree with the thesis of the monograph, but their sources are so extensive and thorough that I just love it, right? And I was like, I have to have this book on my shelf because I'm going to use it as a reference, because the sourcing is amazing. And so I can, like, get all the sources I need on everything and so on. So really good books can be like, have a crap hypothesis, and yet if they source well, the book is still valuable. So that's how scholars react to these kinds of things. It's like, the reason we cite books, even our own books, is because that's where we've already aggregated the sources for you and organize them for you to locate and so on.
Listen, I never forget it. I'm not even sure you're familiar with the great John Henry Clark. He said one of the first things he likes to do when he grab a book is he go to the back of it to see what type of sources is in it.
Yeah.
That's how you can tell a good book from a piece of trash.
Yeah.
Now, when I opened up some of your books, you actually had sources and explanations, so you could actually learn from you just could read the sources and learn from your material.
Yeah,
I found that to be very interesting. Why you source like that?
Yeah. Well, that's how you're useful, right? That's, as a historian, if you're going to be useful, you need to sort. And one of my biggest complaints that I have when I read amateur mythicist literature, and this is in the field of people who doubt the historicity of Jesus, which I'm in that community, but I've published through peer review. But there's a lot of amateur books. My biggest complaint about a lot of them is they'll be full of claims, but there's no sources, right? They don't cite their sources, or they'll cite sources really badly. Like there's the Jesus Mysteries by Freakin' Gandhi, and it opens with this reference to Mithras, supposedly the Persian mystery cult leader, the savior god Mithras, doing a whole this bread is my body, wine is my blood Eucharist thing. And I saw that and I'm like, whoa, okay, what's the source? Because I've never seen anything like this. I've looked, I've never seen it. What's your source? And so I checked their source, and it's this 19th century scholar. And I if you watch the debate, you notice that I have a real issue with people citing 19th century scholars. 19th century scholarship is terrible. Like, you can't rely on it. Okay, so they cited this 19th century book, and I'm like, oh, great, that's bad news. Okay, I'm going to find it. Now, it's tough, right? You have to go through a lot of work to get that 19th century source. So I did. And it cites an earlier 19th century source. Okay, so I go to that one. And then it cites this other thing, this medieval text. And then I go to that and I realize, oh, this is it's medieval, it's Christian, it's Zoroaster who's doing the ritual, not Mithras. And it's clearly just a Christian appropriation of Mithraism. It has nothing to do with ancient evidence of Mithraic mysteries' influence on Christianity. And so that kind of pissed me off. I had to go through all of that research
Just
to find out that they completely fucked up their reference.
Oh, wow. Messed up the whole. That's funny.
That's the kind of thing that I have a problem with. And so when I do my stuff, I try to go to the primary evidence as much as possible so that you can immediately go to that. And to do, when I'm doing scholarship, to do the most recent scholarship that discusses that subject, not stuff from the 19th century.
So, okay. 19th century made a lot of mistakes. Was it just based off of the available data that's now coming in? Like what was that? Because remember, they used to say that I remember early on when they first got to Egypt and they was trying to figure out what it was.
Yeah.
And when they finally cracked the Meta Nature, they realized that Egypt was older, right? And you found a lot of people like let's say the Masons, the Illuminati, those groups were actually saying that the source of all religion came from Egypt, that the age of enlightenment. Can you talk about that a little bit?
So I'm not an expert in that. I know what you're referring to, that was a fashionable thing in the 19th century for sure.
Correct.
That's not my field, so I haven't studied that. So so I can't comment like expertly on that, but I'm aware of that, as there were these fashions. But as a historian, my concern is that in the 19th century, all history, not just Egyptology, all histories had very low standards. They hadn't really professionalized the standards in the field yet, and their peer review was not up to par. So like almost anybody could publish and look impressive, right? No matter how absurd their stuff. Now it got better in the early 20th century, but when I went to graduate school, Columbia University in New York, and my first day when I sat down to have a conference with my dissertation advisor, who was William V. Harris, who's an expert in ancient literacy and ancient economics and ancient imperialism and so on. He's a Roman history expert. One of the first things he told me is that he said, I think he said this right out the bat, like, don't trust anything written before 1950. And I said, what do you mean? And like he like gave this explanation, and his thing is like, sometime around 1950, the standards of history had like a quantum improvement, where like before 1950, standards were pretty low and areas of interest were pretty narrow. After the 50s, there was a much broader range of interests, and the standards started getting more sophisticated. Like it was harder to get through peer review. There were more rigorous standards for citation and argumentation and so on. Now there's a whole backstory to why that is. It's a long story, and it probably has to do with the GI Bill and the democratization of knowledge. But the phenomenon is documentable. You can show like a history book in 1925 and a history book in 1965 are really different in their standards of evidence, their standards of argument and citation and so on. So I'm distrustful even of things before 1950, but the 19th century is just the worst of it. Because there was a huge explosion of publication with no controls. And so that's why you get a lot of these crazy ideas just readily floating around.
Oh yeah, a lot of crazy ideas post 50s. After World War II, UNESCO they publish a statement on race, and so you had a lot of racism in the information.
Yeah. That's also an issue. Yeah. Oh, in some respects, it hasn't totally gone away, right? But
no, absolutely not. Absolutely not. We have to. Yeah, you gotta keep your eye on that. Yeah, and so as we try to fight through that situation, it's like a carryover, and we're not trusting. So what is meant when you say, because I don't want to look at you and say, look at the color of your skin, I don't trust you. I had to learn how to block that out, because you can get tricked with somebody look just like you. I learned that very fast.
Oh, yeah.
Being in a cult. So I ain't worrying about what you look like. I want to know what you put on that paper, right? Can I look at the sources? Can I critique them? Can I see where you're coming from? Is your material valid? So and looking at it that way, right? What is meant when you say your work, right? And correct me if I'm wrong, right? Has went through peer review. Has all your work went through peer review? And what does that mean for you?
No, so my blog isn't peer reviewed. That's just me blogging, right? So you're really just trusting my standards there.
Okay.
And so yeah, certain publications I've done are peer reviewed and some aren't, and it varies, but depending on which thing you're talking about. So peer review generally means now there's publishers of books, publishers of journals, and there are bogus ones. There's ones that pretend to be peer reviewed but aren't really.
Open access.
Yeah, well, no, open access in and of itself is not a problem.
Correct, but some predatory. I'm talking about predatory.
Exactly. Yeah,
All right, go ahead.
they've shown this. There's like studies have been done where even physics journal, there's bogus physics journals out there. So you really got to be on your guard for what journals and publishers have respect and respectability. But when they're doing it for real, what they mean is you submit an article or a book, and the usual standard is double-blind, duplicated peer reviews. So they'll have two separate independent peer reviewers. They will be experts in their field. So they'll be usually professors or retired professors with PhDs in the relevant field. And you won't know who they are. And ideally, they won't know who you are. That's part of the process. Usually, not always the case, but usually that's the process. That's kind of the gold standard of peer review. And then those scholars will look at it and they'll say that their job is not to agree with the thesis. They don't have to agree with you. All they have to do is say, like, have they met the standards of the field? Are there any egregious mistakes here that should not like fly? And really, that's it, right? So, like, are they meeting the standards in terms of citation, in terms of argumentation? Are there are tons of claims with no sources cited, or or are there claims made that are obviously false and that it should never pass, right? So that doesn't mean that like false things don't get through peer review. There's lots of garbage gets through peer review from time to time, but it is one standard that really does filter out quite a lot of material. So it does matter that if you can pass peer review. It's not a proof. It's not a gold seal that you're right or that you didn't lie or anything like that. But it is basically, it puts the bar much higher to get across. And I always think that in terms of like when people, and they used to do this is years and years ago. I wrote an article on pyramid stuff, like pyramid mania. Okay. Fox News did this thing. It was a whole story. So I wrote an article for Skeptical Inquirer many years ago about this. Ever since I wrote that article, for years, no more, I don't get this anymore, but for years I used to get all of these crazy treatises. People would send me their latest manuscript on some weird, crazy theory about the pyramids. My response is always like, get it through peer review. If you can't meet that bar, then you really should give up and change subjects, go study something else, right? Because that matters, because if someone could meet that bar, that tells me that they've met a standard that warrants my paying attention. Otherwise, it's just any crank stuff that people throw at me. It's not really, I don't have enough life in me, not enough lifetime in me to read all the crank literature that could be thrown at me. But so having peer review actually does filter out a lot of stuff. It really narrows the field to things that's kind of the best of, right? And so that it actually shows that, okay, someone's looked at this and they vetted it and they say it's at least worth your paying attention to. It's at least worth your reading. That's kind of the gist of what peer review is going for in that. And yeah, to maintain the standards of professionalization and citation and all of that.
I can't remember this blog. It was this guy who he ran his website and you could put it in there to see if the journal was predatory or not. I forget the name of it. They kind of sued him. What's his name?
There have been a few of those. I don't know what the latest one is, but yeah, you can Google how do you tell if a journal is peer reviewed,
right?
And you'll find a bunch of articles, and the best articles will probably link you to some of those sites that check that or score them and grade them.
Correct.
There's a variety of different ways to do that. There isn't really a single independent. There's not like a certifying agency that you can go to. Like with colleges, they're either certified or they're not, and there's like an actual official certifying agency that you can trust the standards of. We don't have that for peer review. But there are people who are trying to fill that gap with their own metrics, as it were. So particularly now, because the proliferation of disinformation sources has become a problem in like the last 5 years, right? Like 5 or 10 years.
Oh, that's last 5 or 10. I thought it was more than that.
Well, it's always been a problem, but it's become like a crazy explosion of a problem, right? And you'd mentioned like the open access, right? The term open access, I don't want to demonize that. I don't want people to feel bad about it. Like there's a lot of really high quality, legitimate journals that do open access. But once it existed, now just anybody who wants to exploit anything could try and like fake their way in, and no one was policing it for a while, right? So like a lot of fake journals got created, and so you got to be wary about that.
Yeah, it's crazy. And my thing is, I always want to arm the community with the best information and keep them out of a cult. So a
Yeah.
lot of that, if you know, your believing brain,
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
and you're going to get tricked. And so for me, scientific literacy is
Yeah.
actually the vaccine, right, against
Mhm.
the charlatans to come amongst you. So okay, we talked about quackery and stuff like that. So let me ask you this: doing a little reading up on you, and they say you're on the fringes, right, of Scott. Why do they say that? I know it's particularly for the Jesus Christ
It's
argument.
just the historicity stuff. Yeah. Right.
Correct. Right.
Yeah. I don't think any of my history work is fringe other than that.
Right. Correct. No. You're right.
It's fringe in the sense that there's only a very, very small minority of us who are actually convinced by this yet. The reality is that most scholars are ignoring it. This is, and I talk about this. I have an article on how do you evaluate consensus. So consensus is often bogus, but also it's a valuable resource, right? So how do you tell the difference between a sound consensus and a malformed consensus, a consensus you can trust versus a consensus you can't? And I talk about how you can tell these things. But
on
one
your
of the
blog, on your blog, because we're gonna need that.
Yeah,
That's
I'll
gonna be a
throw it
good
in the
read for
private
everybody.
chat, and you can
Put in the
carry it
private
over.
chat. I want the community to get that because we had
Let
these.
me see. Consensus. Yeah.
That's
all
good.
this stuff, just for people who know, you can find everything about me, my blog, my books, the online courses I teach,
We're gonna put that
all
out
the
there
stuff
for
you're
you.
interested in. You can find at richardcarrier.info. In fact, this link, once it gets carried over, is my website. It's just to a specific article. But from that site, you can find all the other things. You can find my Facebook feed, my Twitter feed, my everything else. So all the subjects that I write under, all my books, everything you want to know about me is there. It's warehoused at that site. But yeah, the one I just threw in private chat is the consensus. So it's on evaluating arguments from consensus. And one of the key factors, there's several, but one of the key factors is the consensus based on people who actually read the study that the consensus is on? Right? Is it a consensus of people who haven't even read it? Well, that's useless. It doesn't matter how expert they are. It's useless if they haven't even checked the subject, right? So you do need to figure out, like, who's actually checked and what is their consensus, right? You have to go look for the micro consensus, essentially. Otherwise, what you get is this sort of dogma, the sort of dogmatism that develops. And this happens even in the sciences, although the sciences are more resistant to dogmatism. The hard sciences are more resistant to dogmatism than the humanities. So philosophy and history are highly vulnerable to dogmatism. But yeah, so that's it's one of the things you look for is, like, when you're talking about the consensus, who are you talking about? One is, are they still alive? I often find people will say, well, the consensus, and they'll list a bunch of dead people. And I'm like, well, their opinions don't count anymore, right? Like, they're not aware of what's going on now. That opinion's obsolete. We got to get back to what's the current thing. But yeah, you need more current, and you need people who've actually read the study that you're asking the consensus about. And if you can't have that, and sometimes you don't, like if the field is avoiding something, which I think they're doing with my work, they're actively avoiding interacting with it. So you can't, it's hard to find anyone who's actually read it. And it's not just me, I should point out. Raphael Lataster published Questioning the Historicity of Jesus. So there are 2 peer-reviewed publications, and they're by respectable peer-reviewed academic presses, 2 studies doubting the historicity of Jesus, and there's 0 studies refuting us, right? So so that's the status of the field right now. So there is a dogmatism, a sort of resistance to reading this stuff. But if you can't do that, then what you have to do is you have to actually use your critical thinking and look at that. And I look at compare the arguments of, I'm going to put another one up. So I have this article on Galatians. Let me see if I can, yeah, here it is. It's called, I'll put it in the private chat and you can throw it back over. It's called Galatians 1:19, Ancient Grammar and How to Evaluate Expert Testimony. Now, the occasion of the article is an obscure biblical translation question. But I use it as a teaching tool to teach general principles about what do you do when you have experts who are arguing, and they're arguing about ancient Greek, and you have no way of learning ancient Greek. So how do you vet that argument, right? Like, what do you do? Like, you have 2 competing experts saying different things. How do you figure out who's telling you the truth? Well, there is generally a way. There's usually a way to do it. And you just need to understand basic logic, basic fallacies, and how to analyze an argument. And if you can do that, you can compare their arguments, and you know which things to trust them. So one of the examples is, do they both agree on something? So, like, if one scholar lists a bunch of premises and the other scholar doesn't challenge those premises, then the critic is agreeing. So you have both the critic and the proposer both agree that those premises are true. Well, that's useful information. So like if their premise is about what the Greek means, well, then you don't need to know Greek, because they even the experts who are arguing with each other agree on that, right? And so you can use that data as a platform to build on. And you say, well, what do they disagree on and why? And then you analyze that and then try to figure out, like, are they giving valid arguments? Are they like logical arguments? Are they fallacious arguments, etc.? So you can evaluate expert disputes as a layperson, but it does require there to be an expert dispute, and it has to be. It's beneficial if it's properly argued. So that's why peer review matters. So like the examples I give in that article I just threw up are in peer reviewed journals, so they require them to have full argumentation, full citation, and so on. So it ensures tight quality argumentation to a certain level. And that allows you, the layperson, to evaluate, to look at their both two arguments and compare their arguments. And then when it comes to premises that you can't evaluate, there's ways for you to rely on them to evaluate it for you, even when there's a dispute. So those are two examples of articles. Those articles say a lot more than what I just said, but they're designed to help lay people figure out, what do you do with expert testimony when you yourself aren't an expert? And you really have to, because we really do need to be able to critique expert testimony. We can't just blindly rely on it.
You just running around blindly looking. Okay, I got you. All right. So yeah, some of the things you said, some people gonna run with it, like consensus. So I know you made two distinctions here. You talked about scientific consensus, and then you talked about scholarly consensus.
Right.
Let's go back over that again, because I don't want people to take that. We don't need no consensus. I'm not listening to it. That is not what you said. But there's a lot of listening comprehension.
Yeah.
So I want to run back over that again. Let's go to. So we're talking about two separate things. One is the scholarly consensus, and one is the scientific consensus. And you said the scientific consensus is more resistant, right?
To dogmatism.
To dogma.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go back again. So you're not throwing away the consensus. That's not what you're saying. I want to make
absolutely
sure.
Not. And even when, like, when you're talking like physics, to get to like physics, the standards in that field are so incredibly high that it's extremely rare to ever have a consensus that's wrong, right? And even when there is a consensus that's wrong, the field rapidly changes, right?
Okay.
Like the consensus will flip. It's because their standards of evidence are so high that if you actually meet that standard, like, it's almost impossible to disagree with it, right? So, but that's different when you're talking about history. Like now I've skipped like 50 different levels of science versus humanities and stuff. When you're talking about history, well, okay, there's a lot of bullshit that could pass and pass as consensus, because their standards necessarily, it's not that their standards are low. I mean, they are relative to physics, but they're low relative to physics because they have to be, because we do not have the data that we have for physics. Like, you can't meet the bar for physics in most historical claims. So you have to do the next best thing, which is, different levels of probability. And so history is more prone to getting dogmatism and stuff. There's less awareness of what their methodology even is and how to hold standards. They have some knowledge and they have some standards, but they're not as good as physics. But again, like I said, there's no way to fix that necessarily, because like history is always, I always describe philosophy as science with worse data, right? Science is just philosophy with better data. Philosophy, therefore, is just science with worse data. And history is in the same camp, right? History it does technically belong to the sciences, but it tends to work with much more ambiguous and problematic data. And so you have to take that into account. Now, most professional historians do take that into account. And so most of the historical consensus on most things is reasonable, because it's based on the understanding that we can't be certain. There's only certain things we can be certain of, and there's other things we can't be certain of, and so on. It's just when dogmatism creeps in, it can be really hard to root out. And I have to point out, like, it's exceptionally hard, like probably 10 times harder in the field of Christian studies, right? Because Christian studies is not only highly awash with Christian apologists with a faith agenda, it's also highly policed by Christians with a faith agenda. So Christians often control the funding. They often control, who gets complained about, who gets in trouble. It's like who gets pressure, who gets harassment. So because there's it's so fraught, that Christianity, the study of Christianity, is even more prone to dogmatism than history is generally. And so you do have to be extra attentive to that. But yeah, there's ways around this. There's ways to work out like when is a consensus reliable and when is it not. But those ways have to be logical. They can't just be self-serving. So yeah, you can't say like, well, I can just reject any consensus I want. It's like, well, you got to talk about what consensus are you talking about what, in what field, what is it based on, and that's how you evaluate that.
Right, see, I just need that type of clarity because they're going to take your words, they're going to run with it, and they're going to start making up their own things. And this is where we at, and this is where the rubber meets the road at, Richard. Richard, I just want to be able to have high-level conversations where we can actually give the people tools so they don't run around here and get tricked.
Yeah, that's actually, it's funny. That's been another funny thing. That's been my like sort of jam for the last 5 years about. So I was just a debunker, right? I would just debunk things. So that was fun and I was good at it. But it was about 5 years ago, maybe a little longer. I can't remember the exact timeline, but roughly on that timeline, I started to think that debunking isn't enough. Well, one of the things that happened is I started to notice there's a shared methodology among cranks in all fields. So
what is it? Hold on, slow it down. Wait a minute. There's a shared methodology between cranks and the pseudos. I'm gonna add that in there. I'm gonna add something to your word.
Yes. So you have the pseudoscientific stuff, you have the pseudo-religious stuff, you have the political stuff, you have like the racism stuff, like all of the apologetics for the Civil War and apologetics for the Nazis and all, everything you think of, all the crankery you can think of.
Okay. Crankery.
All of it uses a similar platform of methods like these. And I kept noticing this, right? And I was like, I should actually write about that more. Like I should start thinking about it more. It's like, what can I detect in terms of what is this common toolbox that cranks and delusionoids use?
Delusionoids.
Yeah. And so so when I debunk something now, usually when you read an article by me now, I don't just debunk it. I usually will turn it into a platform to teach some sort of general principles so that you can see like, here's how they're getting to their conclusion. And here's why that methodology doesn't work. And therefore that's how you can detect a bad conclusion when you look at the methodology and you can tell that they're not getting there in a sound way. And so I want to teach those tools to people. And so that's a lot of what I've been doing lately. And that's, you notice that consensus article is exactly that. It's like, here's a generic tool for you to evaluate consensuses in a rational way that is not just always believe it or always reject it whenever you want. And so similar things. So, and when I did the article on the Brother Jabari debate that prompted this show, you'll notice that I'm doing that. I'm not just debunking the situation, but I'm also like explaining general principles that can help people.
Absolutely.
You can apply them to other subjects. They're not just applicable in this one particular case. And so I'm more interested in doing that, teaching general principles and catching and exposing general principles so that if you learn the methods of a crank, you can learn how to spot them in any field, in any topic. So that's been my goal lately. The work's kind of scattered, but it's what I've been working on. And so that you'll see that as a trend in my articles over the last 5 years or so.
Yeah, I'm trying to think which article you was actually giving us the steps to actually the do's and don'ts when trying to put, I forget which one.
You're talking about the nine rules?
Yeah, let's talk about the 9 rules.
Yeah, that was
and then we can take a little break and we get back and we're gonna get into the debate because that's what they really want to hear about. How you felt.
So the article that I was just talking about is no, the original Christians did not loot Egypt. And I think
yes, that's okay.
You've probably already thrown that link into the comments. But that I referred to some problems with modern Kemetic mythology, which is the article that led to the debate, right? And in that article, at the end of it, I sort of organized my whole critique in terms of here's 9 things that you should, what they would call, it's called a 9-line in the military, right? You would hand someone a card that has the 9-line, which is, these are the 9 things that you got to remember, the most important things about whatever it is, cleaning a gun or whatever. There's a 9-line, right? And so I give a 9-line for critical thinking. It's not a comprehensive 9-line. It's just 9 things you definitely really do need to observe and pay attention to. And you'll notice number 1 is don't trust things before 1950.
Right.
And I have an article on that that's linked in there where I write about that. But yeah, there's 9 others.
Can we hear him?
The ninth one is very particular.
Okay.
Which is don't just believe any etymology, meaning history of a word that someone spurts at you. Check real linguistic scholarship first. I actually took linguistics at Columbia. As one of my graduate program field things that I did ancient Greek linguistics. I hated that course, but I took it, and I learned a lot. But I did learn, like, what is the difference between the sort of etymologies, the sort of word histories that people just make up and you hear circulating on the internet, versus genuinely scientifically researched etymologies, which like how do they do that? What is their data and stuff? I learned all of that there, and it was impressive. And so now, I have a great deal of respect for proper linguistic etymological research. And you do need to look at that. You can't just believe any, etymology, like, oh, Mary sounds like mare, which sounds like sea, therefore Mary means the sea. It's like, no, that's not how linguistics works. Anyway, so that's an example of how in that 9 line, that's a very specific rule that you only run into basically in crank history. Bogus etymologies are a common thing that happen in all, not just crank Egyptology, but like a lot of ancient history baloney will often make these arguments about etymologies, and it's kind of a common trend. That trend happened a lot in the 19th century, which is probably where the fad got transmitted to us because of the love for 19th century scholarship among cranks today.
Yeah, me too. Let me kind of rewind back just a little bit. You said that there's a common theme amongst cranks and pseudos, and they use the same type of methodology. And what was that again? I want to double down that.
Yeah, I haven't organized the answer to that in one place. So,
okay.
But you'll notice that if you read my articles, I'm talking about things. One example is primer. Let's see primer. Oh gosh, you might like this one. My primer on reading media. Let's see if I can pull that up. Here it is, a vital primer on media literacy. I'll throw the link in. You can pass it over. So that is, I've noted, here's an example. So one thing that I find is very common is what I call a trap belief, which is you become convinced that you can no longer trust a source for a bogus reason.
Okay.
And because you've been siloed by that distrust, you only trust sources that are feeding you the bad information. And so evidence can never get into you, because you just reject all evidence against you because it's coming from a source that you've been falsely convinced not to trust. And that's a trap belief. When someone convinces you to not trust honest sources of information, you're trapped because now you're completely immune to evidence, and you're never going to escape your false belief. And so this is like one of the most dangerous mental conditions to be in. And so I really want to warn people against it and how to avoid it. And so I talk about, like, for instance, why is Fox News it is actually objectively much worse than MSNBC. MSNBC is terrible. Fox News is beyond terrible compared to that. And yet MSNBC is not the answer to Fox News. There are like Reuters and Washington Post and like actual high quality things. And it's not that they're not biased. It's not that they never get anything wrong, but they have standards that are vastly different. And so, but if you'll never read the Washington Post and never believe anything in the Washington Post because it's a liberal run organization. And so that's a trap belief. You've trapped yourself. So now you've made yourself immune to sources of information. And another example of that, which ties into that, which is the most important critical skill that I teach, is the first thing you should always ask is, how would I know I'm wrong?
Right. Enough people don't have enough information.
Right. A lot of people don't take that seriously or think to ask that question. And that really is the beginning of all critical thought, is taking that question seriously, like really taking it seriously. Like, how would I know I was wrong? And then how do I check, right? Like, how do I check if I'm wrong? Like, how do I test that? And if you take that seriously and you really do it, almost all critical thinking skills come out of that. They're just ways of doing that, in a sense. Let's see, what do I do? Oh, scary thing. The scary thing about critical thinking. That's scary truth. Sorry, the scary truth about critical thinking. Here, I'll throw this in there. So this is another example of an article where I'm thinking about how people should think and how they should spot bad argumentation and the methodology. So my point being is I haven't built an organized toolkit of crank methodologies yet, right? I'm building there. I've got a bunch of articles where I catch a few things. And so I have an article you can find on Mott and Bailey. I don't know if you know about Mott and Bailey.
Not familiar with them.
So Mott and Bailey means Mott meaning the fortress. This is medieval terminology. The fortress, and the Bailey is kind of like the field, and the field has a wall around it. And so the field is hard to defend, but you defend it until someone comes in, and then you run to the fort. Like if you can't hold the Bailey, you run to the Mott. Now, so that's a actual medieval military strategy, but it also describes a rhetorical strategy that cranks will use, where they will come in with a completely crazy claim.
Oh man!
And it's easily debunked, right? And so you easily debunk it. And so what do is they run to a more defensible version of their argument, where it's immune to your objection. And you go, oh, okay, all right. Well, I guess if you go to that one version, okay, that's more arguable. And then as soon as you walk away, they're back at the Bailey defending the ridiculous argument. And so this Mott and Bailey move, once you know to look for it, you see it happening a lot. Like I never noticed it until I read an article about it, which prompted me to write an article about it. And now I see it everywhere. I see this Mott and Bailey. Put that link in there. And I mentioned brother Jabari did it in our debate.
Yeah.
So that's actually kind of what he's doing when he's doing the whack-a-mole project. When I was really pressing hard on something. Yeah, I was pressing hard on something. He would jump to another theory that we're not debating, and he would start like pushing that. I'm like, that's not what we're talking about. Why did you jump to that? Well, that's your Mott. You're running to that, right? So it was like the imperial Christianity.
Wait a minute. What he was actually doing was Mayatin Bailey. You know what I'm saying? He wasn't doing the one you were talking about. He was doing the Mayatin Bailey from Mayat. All right, let me stop. Yeah. All right. Yeah, that's a great point. Hold on. I'm gonna tell you where we at. We want to take 1 second, man, just for a second, real quick. We get ready to get into the next hour.
We're at the hour, yeah.
Yep, we had the hour, man. We had a great conversation, man. We talked about atheism, naturalism. We talked about the Nigerian atheist, Tyson Learning. Did I say that right?
No, Ty Solarin.
Ty Solarin. Got you. Well, almost messed it up. Neo-paganism. Okay. Having a great conversation. We talked about sources. We talked about the consensus, academic consensus, scientific consensus. Man, hit that like button, man. Hit that like button, man. And y'all know, hit that Cash App, man. All right. Y'all know y'all can get in touch, okay, with Richard. He has an excellent blog. He has a page where you can get in contact with him if you want to bring him on your thing. He's open to that. Like we talked about, a lot of scholars don't like to do it. And so I'm glad you took that leap, right? Of course, an atheist would do it.
Yeah, I cultivate it because this is my profession, right? So I'm an independent scholar. This is part of what I do. That does also mean that I am on hire. I don't do this for free. So people should be aware of that. But I am cheap relatively. Like you'd be surprised at what some people cost. But there are scholars who'll do it for free until they get tired of it. So you want to grab them in that narrow window before they've been burned out.
Yeah, we got you just right. We got, and like I said, we shout out the brother Kent, man. We got a little studio built. I told you about it. We're gonna get you down in the studio and do that great interview, man. We definitely doing that. Big up to the
audience might not know I'm in Atlanta now. I used to live in California. And then I used to live in Ohio. Like people thought, I thought you were in Ohio. No, and I thought you were in California. No, I mean I was. Now I'm in Atlanta. I'll probably be here for some years.
Okay, well, yeah, we definitely gonna get with you. But hit that like, hit that subscribe button, man. We got a great conversation. We got 200,000 people in the building watching this episode of Community Skeptics, man. Big up to the Community Skeptics, man. We are skeptical of everything humans talk about, right? Make sure y'all like and subscribe. Make sure y'all support the pseudo killers, man. When we are opposed to pseudoisms all day, every day, right? We bring in the information to the community at high levels, man. We're having this intelligent conversation, man. So this is the good part, right? Maybe we'll talk about this for like 20 minutes and we drop that link and let them come with them hard questions. You know what I'm saying? I like Mike Tyson used to say, man, everybody got a plan till they get hit with that first punch. Everybody think they can get with a person who really understands, have command of the information until, right, you get them. So let's get right into it. You talked about Jabari running a tactic. I knew it was a tactic, but I had no idea it was called what you called it, right?
Mott and Bailey. Yeah.
Wow.
I'll throw that. You know what? I'll throw the spelling of that in.
Yeah, we call it my yacht and Bailey, though.
Bailey. Wait.
The
Oh,
M-A-A-T.
you spell it correctly.
All right, let's go.
It's Old English, so it
Mhm.
looks weird. The spelling is stupid, but
All right,
that's how it
interesting.
works. But if
Yeah.
you search my blog for that phrase, you'll
Okay.
find my article on that.
Okay.
No, when he did so, he did he was trying to defend 3 different theories
Mhm.
through the whole debate that were completely unrelated to each other. We were supposed to only be debating one of them,
Mhm.
and I kept trying to keep us on that track, but it was difficult.
Oh.
But 2 of them were, one was the one that we were supposed to be debating, which is, did the original Christians invent Christianity out of Egyptian religion?
Mhm.
Which is not enough evidence to support that. But another one that he kept jumping to was, did imperial Christians, hundreds of years later, do a lot of horrible things like destroying and appropriating Egyptian art and literature and stuff? And I was like, absolutely, they did that. But that was hundreds of years later. You can't blame the first Christians for what their ancestors did or their descendants did. So there's 2 different things. And he would do that a lot. And there was a moment, I can't remember exactly when, but and when it really hit me, like in my mind while it was happening, it's like, oh my God, he's Mott and Baileying me.
That's
where and I don't remember what triggered it. I wish I could remember the exact moment, but I was pushing hard on the dubiousness of something he was talking about for the origins of Christianity, and then he immediately leapt to oh yeah, but like in the 5th century they were like destroying temples and stuff, and I'm like, not what we were talking about. But why did you jump there? And then I realized, like, oh yeah, because that's an easily defensible hypothesis, right? Like, so the hypothesis he couldn't defend, that's his Bailey. And so when he was pressed too hard, he couldn't hold the Bailey, he ran to the Mott and started making it about the Mott, like pretending like that's relevant. It wasn't, but that's what he did. And he did that a few times. Like whenever he'd get pressed hard on something, he couldn't defend it, he would run to the Mott. And he had 2 Motts to run to. One was the imperial Christian, the medieval Christian behavior, cultural appropriation, and all of that. And then the other was the different one, which was, it wasn't really a Mott, it was more of a different Bailey, but a different part of the Bailey, which is the Egyptians invented everything point. Like, so if you go back like 2,000 years, and I'm like, why are we going back 2,000 years? The Christianity wasn't invented that, the Christianity was invented 2,000 years later. They don't know what was going on 2,000 years before them. Like, that's not relevant. Why are we talking about this? And it's like, well, it's because it's a different part of the Bailey he's retreating to. Once he couldn't hold one party, he went and defended the other. Once he lost that part, he would run to the Mott, which was imperial Christianity and medieval Christianity and all of that. So yeah, that was his sort of triangular Mott and Bailey tactic. And he used it a lot in the debate. And in fact, if once you know that and you look at it and you watch the transitions throughout the debate, you'll catch it. You'll see it a lot more than you would normally have noticed it.
Okay, so he was really promoting a conspiracy theory, right? And
yeah, not specifically though, like
kind of, so was it kind of,
at least that would have been specific, right? I kept pressing him
Mm.
to be more specific. I need a specific, like, what is your hypothesis? I don't know what your hypothesis is. If he had done a conspiracy theory, like, to give an example, like Dorothy Murdoch, who's known as Akaria S, she does a lot of like the Christians, and he might even like support some of her literature. I don't know, because she argues similar thing where Christianity came out of like sun god worship, yada yada, and then a cabal, a secret cabal of of Christian bishops in Egypt or something like this, conspired to destroy all the evidence and change everything. And it's like this conspiracy. Well, I mean, that's bogus, but it's at least a coherent theory. Like, I understand the theory. It's like, okay, now I know what you're arguing. Now we can ask, like, what does that predict? What evidence should we be able to find? What evidence how would you know you were wrong? You can answer that question once you know what it is that you're claiming, right? So yeah, a specific hypothesis, even a conspiracy theory, like at least if it's specific, then you can start attacking it or addressing it or figuring out if it's true. But yeah, if you just sort of, what he did is he did imply conspiracy theory, but he never articulated who the conspirators were, what their goals were, when they coordinated, where they coordinated, like what, it's like he was just all over the place. Couldn't pick a century to talk about, right? Like, it was just jumping from 500 years apart and stuff. So I couldn't get a coherent theory out of him. But you're right, there was kind of the implication, and he did keep saying like he had these, like, there's sort of a mystery religion behind it. Like, he was saying, like, you know what I really mean, or whatever. Like he said that a lot, never got to it. But I do think, yeah, he's talking about some sort of conspiracy theory, so but he never articulated it, and you
So it
can't
was
defend a theory
incoherent.
if you can't articulate what the
So
theory
you
is.
said he basically didn't articulate a theory on what he was actually talking about. Now, for me, how I learned to actually deal with subjects is chronology. Chronology puts you in a certain time, a certain space. And I felt like in that debate, he was crunching chronology all over the place, mixing times and errors. Did you get that kind of feeling out of that? Well, how do you think his chronology was?
Well, that's exactly the three theories that he would jump between. He's basically being chased through three different positions. One is about 500 AD. One is 100, or like near the turn of the era, and the other was 2,000 years before that. Give or take. But those are the three periods he kept jumping between. And he couldn't get to a coherent explanation of what even relates to those three periods. Why are we talking about them? We should just be talking about the first Christians. That's all that matters, right? And for that debate specifically. But yeah, so yes, he kept jumping around chronology, and that was really confusing and hard to follow. So I struggled. I
so you
navigated my way through, but yeah, it took me a while to realize that was happening. That was another thing. Is like, so like towards the end of the debate, I got it. Like I figured, oh, he's jumping, and I'm pretty sure I mentioned it a couple times in the debate. Once we get further on, I realized that that's what he's doing, and that's the problem that we need to work on. I tried to work on it, but it didn't work. In the Q&A period, like in the cross-examination period, right. I had three good questions, but I couldn't get him to even answer one of them. And they were meant to build on each other, and I couldn't get to all the questions I wanted to get to. But
so you debated one of my favorite, Bart Ehrman.
I did not debate Bart Ehrman.
You had a conversation. It was a conversation. What was it?
So he and I have interacted through writing.
Why did I think I seen you on a? What am
I reviewed his debate with Robert Price, and I was there for that debate. Okay. He actually refuses to debate me. There was someone that as I understand it, they were willing to offer him $10,000 to debate me, and he turned them down. He wouldn't do it. He has his excuses as to why, like I'm too mean or whatever.
Oh, you think mean-spirited.
But he did agree to debate Robert Price, and so that debate was, of note. And so I wrote a critical review of it. But he and I, he and I have not interacted in a really long time. But about I don't remember when was it, 2012, 2015. It's been like 10 years, I think. 10 years ago, there was a flurry of him blogging and me. He wrote a book that said some things about me, and then I critiqued that, and then he wrote blogs, and then I responded, etc. So all of that, if people are interested in that, I organize it all in one place, and keep it up to date too. So if anything new happens, I don't expect it, but if anything new happens, it shows up in my what I call my Bart Ehrman recap article, and it's a numbered list of disputes we've had and their status. It lists the stages of the argument and what status they're at right now. And that's the place to go to for people who are interested in my debates with Bart Ehrman, but they weren't formal debates like I did with Brother Jabari. So,
so there's a certain level of competition, right? Where do you think he fell at? Well, you said it. You said he didn't actually present a coherent argument. You said it right here.
Oh, you want me to score the debate?
I want to, based off of, I think this is good. And then they say, oh, wait a minute, he's scoring. Of course, you're going to score. But based off of what you know about, because you're an expert in the origin of Christianity. Yeah. So based off what you know, go ahead.
There's a moment in that debate later on where I outright say, and so people who watch it, I say, you just lost the debate. And that's technically and literally true. When he denied my list of fundamentals for Christianity, said those aren't true, you don't have any evidence for that in Paul, he immediately lost the debate. Like it was done. That was it. You've lost. I was shocked that he dared to go that route. I don't know if maybe he regrets doing that, but those are like really fundamental, and they're all over the letters of Paul. So for him to claim that was something I was making up, and that wasn't, those details were not in Paul, like they were even in the quote that he gave of Paul. So that was the final fail, because if you're going to explain Christianity the invention of Christianity is fundamentally a ripoff of Egyptian religion, you needed those fundamentals to come from Egypt, but none of them do. And so that was, for him to go the route of trying to deny that they were even fundamentals of Christianity is just literally a surrender. Like he really lost it at that moment. So it's a conclusive fail. Like there's no, you don't even need to, like, it's not even close really in terms of scoring the debate. Otherwise, I didn't do a flow of the debate. So like if you're doing like a professional scoring of the debate, you would do what's called a flow, and you would like show like who dropped how many arguments and so on. I've not scored it that way. I generally don't bother. It's too much work for too little gain. But yeah, I'm fairly certain if anybody flow scored our debate, like he definitely lost that debate by any technical measure.
Okay, because he didn't have a coherent argument, skipping time and space. Here's another fundamental problem I have with the whole Christianity coming from Egypt. I studied well enough to understand that actually Christianity was a Jewish sect first. Okay, then it broke away. So in actuality, you should be proving that Egypt gave rise to Judaism.
Yeah, and he did try a few arguments like that, sort of scattered throughout the debate. Now that wasn't what we were debating. So and I think like there's more to argue there than there is in the Christian case. So and I mentioned in my article, my last article, it's commonly thought that circumcision and pork taboo come from Egypt, that the Jewish religion borrowed those elements from Egypt. Now, I know there are scholars who challenge the pork taboo, challenge that was ever a thing in Egypt. So the question of whether pork taboo really is Egyptian is an issue.
Correct.
I don't have an opinion on that, but there's a debate and it's not resolved. But circumcision does. Circumcision is definitely an Egyptian thing. It probably originates in Egypt. It was probably adopted by the Canaanites tribe of the Jews, because I suspect that Egypt was their closest neighbor and they wanted to distinguish themselves from other Canaanite tribes. And so they sort of built an association with Egypt out of a desire to be associated with Egypt, not because they actually were associated with Egypt. But nonetheless, that is cultural diffusion from Egypt to Judaism, no doubt. And that became a fundamental of Judaism. Now, I've noticed this is a separate thing from what I do. Lately, there have been serious challenges to whether circumcision actually was a thing in early Judaism. And now I have no opinion on that, but I have noticed that there were some high-powered scholars who've been challenging it. And like challenging the whole Torah actually as being in fact like a 2nd or 3rd century adoption, and not even like we're talking like post-Persian adoption and not an earlier one. I'm shocked at how many like major scholars have been arguing that lately. I haven't seen the response to these new studies. I don't have an opinion in that debate, but that's happening as well. So one has to be aware of that. But you could at least, I think, make a case that there are different elements of Egyptology or Egyptian culture in Judaism. Unfortunately, they happen to be things that the Christians gave up rather quickly, so they weren't very enthusiastic for them. So like circumcision and pork taboo, they chucked that pretty quick.
Out the game, right?
Yeah, like Paul, as soon as Paul came along. Now, to be fair, like the original Jewish sect of Christianity did resist that, and they stuck around, but they never were popular. Like, so they just declined in size and died out. Well, they might have died out. They might have become Islam. That's a whole other story. But they were always small, and they were never significant. The Gentile church exploded, and I think because there's more Gentiles than Jews, and there's more money at the time. There was more money to be had pursuing the Gentile market than the Jewish market. And I think that's why Paul was successful and why his version of the church eclipsed the Jewish version of the church and even became anti-Jewish ultimately.
Oh, right. Absolutely. So, okay. All right. So we think we're getting a pretty good beat on it. And so for me, you got Zoroastrianism. I think you kind of right about that a little bit, Persian. So all right. How I want to say this. Okay. The Egyptian thing giving rise to Christianity, let's say there's small bits and pieces, maybe, right? Marginal. The Persian thing is a little more higher. I know you right on the Persian thing. Where do you put this Persian thing as adding to? I know it definitely added more to Christianity
For
than
people who
Egypt
don't
did.
know what we're talking about, so I go through this in detail in the article that I wrote in response to the debate. But there's Persian Zoroastrianism. Now, Persia means Iran, right?
Mhm.
So we're talking way, way out there, very, very far. But the Persian Empire was one of the first great Middle Eastern empires. Like, it took over even Egypt. Like, it conquered Egypt for a while. It was huge, and even tried to conquer Greece and failed, and so that led eventually to Alexander the Great to go and conquer the Persian Empire, and then they ran everything. But the Persian influence extended very far west because of their imperial conquests. Very effective. And so Zoroastrianism spread that way as well with the conquest, possibly even before the conquest in some respects, but definitely with the conquest. And Zoroastrianism had this collection of weird beliefs that was not in Judaism before Persian influence, but is in Judaism, surprise, after Persian influence. And that's the things that we take for granted as being fundamentally Jewish now. So, like the resurrection of the dead at the end of times, the Messiah, right? Prophecy is a fundamental component of the religion, and so on. And I give examples in the article. But these things are very clearly Zoroastrian, but they became fundamentally Jewish and hundreds of years before Christianity. So by the time Christians, like who are Jews, right? Behind the time these Jews were thinking about and developing Christianity, they were just swimming in the sea of this Judaism that already assumes that there's an apocalypse at the end of times, that there will be a general resurrection of the dead, that the Messiah is crucial in that timeline, and so on. They're just assuming that was just in their scriptures and that was just their religion. Like, they had no idea that it came from Persia, because it was hundreds of years ago. Like, they didn't know that influence had occurred so much further back. So really, they're being Jewish, but you can say it's Persian in the long sense, right? In that sense. But when you look at that, and this is the point I made in our debate with Brother Jabari, when you look at Egyptian resurrection, which is dismemberment, ritual reassembly, and resurrection through a ritual, that isn't the version of resurrection the Christians adopted, right? Their version looks more like Persian Zoroastrian resurrection, because that's what was infected into Judaism, and they were a Jewish movement, right? So that's where it comes from. And that's how you can show like lines of influence and through chronology and so on. And I give that as an example, and I show some counter examples and stuff in the article that can show you how to do this. And my point in the debate was, like, this is what Jabari needs for Egypt. Like, if he could show Christianity adopted very specific things, weird specific things from Egypt that were distinctive in the same way that the things that they adopted that were distinctive of Persia, because they're getting it from Judaism, but it was very, very Persian. And a good example, and I think I gave it in the debate, which is like, if Jesus was dismembered and Mary had to go find all the pieces and assemble it.
Absolutely.
I was like, well, okay, yeah, there's no argument that would have to have been borrowed and lifted from Egypt. That's clearly where it comes from. But that's not what he had. He didn't have any evidence like that kind of specificity. And that's why specificity is important for making these kinds of hypotheses. And I gave the counterexample of baptism. Like, he wanted to say any water ritual is baptism. And it's like, not quite. But when you look at Paul talks about baptism for the dead. Well, that's weird. Okay, that's specific. That's a weird specific thing, meaning that people who are alive could be baptized as proxies for people who died before they could get baptized, so that you could get them into heaven or into resurrection or whatever in the future, but as a proxy, like you would be baptized on their behalf, right? Now, this is a Mormon thing now, but it actually was a thing in Christianity at the beginning. That's a big tell, because we know baptism for the dead for this exact purpose was in Bacchic cult. And we know that because it's in inscriptions that predate Christianity by hundreds of years. So this, like, that tells us, like, that's a very specific thing. It's like, where is he getting this? He's getting his model of baptism. It's Jewish, like there's elements of Judaism, but the fundamental model, the sort of skeletons, the bones that he's putting Jewish flesh on, is mystery cult. It comes from the Eleusinian and Bacchic mysteries for sure. But that's the thing that you need. Like, Jabari needs that for Egypt. Like, if you can find something specific like that ties to Egypt, then he would have a case. Whereas we do have that for the Bacchic cult, right? And probably, I suspect it was common in mystery cult. I suspect possibly even Osiris cult, the Osiris mystery cult, which was the Hellenized Egyptian cult. I suspect it might have had baptism for the dead. We don't have any evidence of that, but I would not be surprised. But we do have evidence hundreds of years earlier for it being Bacchic, and that's before any Hellenistic influence on Egypt. So it definitely wasn't in Egypt then. So it definitely comes from Greek background, not Egyptian. So the Christian baptism, I can prove a very peculiar specific connection that shows causal relationship with Greece, but not with Egypt. And so that if he had evidence like that, he would have a case.
Mm-hmm.
And that's my point, was kind of show that, like, methodologically, how do you argue for what you want to argue? Like, let me help you here. Let me help you. I would teach you how you do this. Now, the facts have to be there. So if you don't have the facts, then knowing the method isn't going to help you. Right? A sound
Correct.
method, if there's no data there, then like your thesis is wrong or not supportable. But if he had it, he could have done it, and I would have been delighted to see that happen. It just didn't happen. Right? Huh? Yeah. Mm-hmm. I'm always happy to learn new things and discover new amazing discoveries like that. But I just haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, I think a background and kind of understanding early Christianity and the origin of Christianity would kind of bode well in this conversation. But I just want to let you know, you're actually tapping on the sacred cow.
Oh,
and
yeah.
And the sacred cow is that Egypt gave rise to Islam, Christianity, and Judaism, African spirituality. That's the sacred cow. I'm telling you.
Yeah, no, I've learned
sacred cow. So yeah, and I've always, early in the game, when I was in a cult, right, that was the mantra. Okay. And as I got more educated and read more literature, more material, that's why I talked about the Age of Enlightenment. Mm-hmm. and how they, they started saying that, right? And then when you really got into trying to verify and chase the sources, track them down, primaries, you start to realize that there's a lot of gap in times. And oh, by the way, those areas where Christianity formed, right, with Judaism formed, right, it's more closely related, like Persia, those areas. So you're going to get more things from there, right, as opposed to getting outside of that. Just for me reading that.
To phrase that correctly, they're getting most of their stuff from Judaism.
Correct.
So it's not that they're near Persia. I mean, technically at the time they were. The border of the Roman Empire,
sometimes
the Persian Empire was pretty close, really, like dangerously close. But it's that they're getting those ideas, the Persian ideas, they're getting from Judaism, unaware of the fact that those leaked from Persia into Judaism centuries before. And so it is important to make that distinction. It's not that the Christians are borrowing. It's not that they're looking east and borrowing a bunch of Persian stuff and not looking west and saying, forget Egypt. No, I don't think that's what they're doing.
Okay.
For whatever reason, they were not particularly fond of any specific details from Egypt. There might be like minor things. I give a few examples in some of my literature earlier on, but they're hard to argue and they're very small and trivial. So I don't think they were completely ignorant of Egyptians. They definitely weren't completely ignorant of Egyptian stuff. They just weren't as enthusiastic as they were for their native Judaism and for the mystery cult complex, which they saw everywhere, not distinctively Egyptian, but everywhere. And I think that was actually part of its appeal, is that they saw it everywhere, and that to them, and this is our point I make in the article, that to them was a sign that it came from God, but because it's everywhere, it's not ethnically specific. And so that made it attractive. Yeah.
The heavens.
I am surprised though to hear that Egypt gets such centrality when Ethiopia is so much more interesting in the history of religion. Ethiopian Christianity is fascinating because it has a much more massive scripture set. Like its Old Testament is extensive. It includes some things that the Christians originally did consider scripture, which is Enoch, for example. Now, these aren't Ethiopian scriptures. They didn't come from Ethiopia. But there's a lot of like interesting stories about how you could really try to make these arguments for everything coming from Ethiopia. Ultimately, you could even say Egypt came from Ethiopia. If you're going to make these kinds of arguments, right? Like, why are we ignoring, if we're going to make these wild arguments, why are we ignoring Ethiopia? I don't understand.
I told you why. The Age of Enlightenment, they following that course. It was, look. All right, let's bring some. Okay, look, I'm dropping the link, man. Let me let these two powerful sisters on here, man. Lady pseudo killers. I got Sister Miss Tiff and Sister Juju. Ooh, Pseudo Killers official, man. So, Miss Tiff, you got a question for Richard?
Not right now. I've been manning the chat and listening, but thank you both for an excellent dialogue and discussion. A lot of information was shared and a lot of new things that we've learned. So we really appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate someone manning the comments too. That's always I know that can be hard work.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, we
And it's
got
valuable
you.
and important. So
Yeah, and posting the links and all of that, making sure we get the support. We'll pass it on to my sister Juju.
Juju, what's on your mind? What's good with you? How you doing?
I'm doing great. Good evening. Glad to have you here, Dr. Carrier. I think the conversation has been pretty amazing. You've definitely given lots of information. I think the best part of it is because in these spaces, we find that a lot of people have not had the experience to have some formal academic training, so to speak, particularly when it comes to like debates or whatnot.
Oh,
So
yeah.
I think it was necessary and very much needed to explain some things that aren't normally discussed in these type of environments. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I hope it's been helpful and educational. That's my ultimate goal with all my work. So debates included. People often ask me like, I had this. So let me tell you a story. So I had a conversation with William Lane Craig. I don't know if our audience is familiar with that Christian apologist, William Lane Craig. I had a debate with him, a big one. That one also had like an audience of like 1,000 people. Live debate. I think it was at Washburn. And afterwards, so these Christians were driving us to the airport afterwards, and Craig and I had this conversation where I don't remember what prompted it, but how we got to this point. But I said, like, I don't actually go to debates to win. And he says, well, what's the point of debating if you're not going to win? And I'm like, well, my goal in debating is to educate. Right. So like my reason to be there is to convey information to the audience that they probably will never have been exposed to.
Facts.
And it might actually lay the seeds of further thought that can lead to more education or an escape from a delusional worldview or whatever. So for me, like the educational role of debate is the most valuable point. Now, obviously, yeah, you have to perform, you have to win, quote unquote. Otherwise, in order for it's almost like a cage match in the sense that like your credibility depends on whether you win or lose.
Right.
And that's silly because like it's easy to game a match in debate. So like it's really hard to truly win a debate because if someone's committed to not being honest, they can make up all kinds of bullshit and technically win a debate. And so that's always like the difficult part of it. But for me, no, the educational value of debate. So I want to reach the audience. I want them to learn things. I want them to hear things that they hadn't heard before. And like I mentioned before, like my kick now is methodology as much as facts. So I'm more interested in the audience learning how to think about these things rather than what to think about these things, if that makes sense in terms of the distinction. And I hope I accomplished as little of that. That's kind of my aim.
It definitely makes sense. Again, thank you. I do have a question.
Good.
And I apologize ahead of time for the question. But of course, I've been reading.
Wow.
I know. Bobby Banker. Don't hate me. But to the
And I
point.
dropped the link to my fault, Juju. I've dropped the link. So yeah, don't be scared. Go ahead, Juju.
Right. We had a lot of chatty patties. So
A lot of chatty in the patty.
Please do. But I've been reading your blogs, and then I've also been reading some of those who have contested your blogs. But first point, Bobby Banger, that's something we always speak on and you say all the time, that it's not about winning. I think this delusion of winning a debate, particularly in this community, is wild. Like people really forget what debates are for. You know what I'm saying? But to the point that some will say that you are a French scholar, how do you respond to that? And what do you have to say in general to those notions?
Yeah, you made me think of something else. So I'm making a note real quick.
Go
So
ahead,
go back
please.
to it. But to answer your question, well, I mean, it's only the case for the historicity question, and so I think it's generally that's a polemical statement, and it does get to like the article that I had thrown into comments about a vital primer on media literacy. Is that this is how people form trap beliefs, right? So to give you an example, that Craig debate, the William Lane Craig debate that I was talking about, we were there to debate the resurrection of Jesus. I had agreed in advance of the debate, like we had agreed that I would just assume the historicity of Jesus as not in challenge.
Right.
And then we would just argue the resurrection, which is what I always recommend doing. If you're going to debate the resurrection, just grant historicity. Like, don't even debate that. Like, the resurrection is way more contestable than the historicity of Jesus. So, like, you should do it that way. But his opening statement, first thing, bam, he doubts the existence of Jesus. And I'm like, why are you bringing that up? Like, we said that's not real. I'm not doing that here. But the reason he did that is it's poisoning the well, right? He wants to make people doubt anything I say about the resurrection, because how dare I suggest that Jesus doesn't even exist? And it's like, well, that's a complex debate. Like, there's reasons. Like, I don't just randomly doubt the historicity of Jesus. I have reasons for that. If you want to debate that, well, we can debate that. But like, no, come on. And so that was a polemical, sort of rhetorical tactic. It wasn't an honest debate maneuver. And so I think when people do, like, you're talking about the fringe scholar thing, and it's really only has to do with historicity.
And you're right about that. That's the only time I've actually like read about that, is to that point.
Right. It's an attempt to make you not trust me as a source, and thus isolate you informationally. So if you are convinced to distrust any information that comes from me, no matter what it is, now you've been controlled in a way that whoever is making this argument wants you to be. So they're cutting you off from information by trying to make you do that. Now, that's different from you yourself out of your own critical examination. Let's say you studied all my stuff and you caught me lying like a ton of times. Let's say you did that. And then you yourself say, I don't trust that Richard Carrier guy. I'm not listening to him anymore. Now, that is not a control belief. That is not a trap belief. That is actually how you should be reacting to sources. Like, if you catch a source repeatedly lying, now you know that source is a source you can't trust. And that's a legitimate example. And so when people are using the fringe scholar thing, they're trying to exploit the legitimate example, right? So there is a legitimate basis for this kind of behavior. They're trying to recreate that, but illegitimately, because they don't have any evidence that I lied. So they're going to fringe to try and imply that I did, right? So like, that's the kind of thing where people try to use legitimate critical thinking moves to defend bogus things, right? And sort of bypass critical thinking. And so, yeah, we do have to be aware of, like, what do you mean by fringe? Why is that relevant? Fringe about what? Does that matter? Why do we care? Why are you bringing it up? Well, and that also, that's another thing about debate that I would recommend people point out, is that the most impressive question to ask in any debate, and someone's taking a position, is like, why do you care? Ask them why they care. So if they say a fringe scholar, like, why did you mention that? Like, why do you care? If he's a fringe scholar, why is that relevant? And that will start a conversation that will lead you to actually getting to talking about things that matter. That might be too scary for people. I find this particular line of questioning, I do this with LGBT and anti-feminists and stuff like that, where people are making these positions, these arguments, about gay marriage or whatever. And I'll ask them, like, why do you care? Why does it matter? And that's a scary question for people who want to take sort of a negative position on these things. And a lot of people will run away. Like, that question is too much. It's a bridge too far. That tells you something in and of itself. But I find that that's an important part of the conversation, is if you can get to their why they're bringing it up, why does it matter to them, and that can lead to an interesting conversation, or it can scare them away. Either one could be a good outcome for you, depending on your circumstances.
Absolutely. I appreciate your transparency. Thank you. And the reason why I brought that up is because you've been in the community for 2 years, to my knowledge, or somewhere around that. And I've never heard anyone speak ill of you until after the Jabari debate. And
oh my gosh. Yeah, I've actually been in the community since 1996.
Okay.
So, but in different streams, right? Doing different things.
Correct. Right.
So this, it's been about 2 years since I've been involved in the Kemetism debate issue.
The chemicism.
The chemicism, and I like that they Egyptophilia. Yeah,
Egyptophilia.
that was funny.
I was trying to coin a word. I think
Yeah, I like
that
that
wasn't the
one.
appropriate one. But anyway,
I don't want to say what we say.
Oh,
All right,
because of
let's
that.
get some people from the.
Egyptocentrism is a more accurate.
All right,
thing.
let's get some people from the audience up here, man. All right, get your question in. All right, I'm gonna go with Sunchild. All right, Sunchild, come on, man. What's your question?
Hey,
Richard Carrier.
thanks for having me in, Dr.
Absolutely.
Carrier.
Hello.
What's up, Dr. Carrier? How are you, sir?
Yeah, doing well.
Awesome. Just a couple of questions.
Nah,
on,
you only get one. One and done. We're not
Well,
doing that. One and done. Let's go.
Well, a question on your sources for Zoroastrianism. You referenced Theopompus and Eudemus as 4th century BC historians that refer to the link with Judaism and Zoroastrianism.
No, they only refer to Zoroastrianism. They do not know of a link to Judaism yet. They don't have any knowledge of a Jewish connection.
Okay, and in which of their works, I've tried finding a work that they discuss Zoroastrianism. If you could help me find that source specifically, it'd be helpful.
Yeah, where do I quote that? I quote them somewhere. I think "Not the Impossible Faith" is where I quote them. And I notice. So what I put.
What's the Impossible Faith? That's your book?
In my book, yeah, where I quote them and give you where the quotes come from. But Theopompus and Eudemus don't survive. Like their books don't survive to us. What we have is quotations of their books from other people. So studying them is more problematic than like studying Josephus, where you can just go read Josephus. Finding their quotes, because they're scattered across like a dozen other books. So you have to go to like scholars who've organized their fragments into one place. Not the Impossible Faith, I do that. So if you really want to like read their words, like the actual words translated, and find where these words are quoted, like so you deep dive them. Not the Impossible Faith is where I do that. You will also find it in any of the other. So in the bibliography I give in the article on this, the Loot article, which is the one that's up standing now. I don't know how long that'll be the top article, but it's right now. It's the top article on my blog. In there, I give a bibliography on Persian influences on Judaism, and I give Not the Impossible Faith at the top, but I give Sunderman, Siegel, Applegate, etc. I think almost all of those, if not all of those scholars, also do what I do, which is they quote and cite the locations of the quotations of Eudemus and Theopompus. And the reason we keep saying Eudemus and Theopompus is that these are the earliest Greek sources that we have quotations surviving of regarding Zoroastrianism. So all of these scholars who study Zoroastrianism find those citations priceless, and so they're key to many arguments.
Okay, and they have direct.
Nah, you're done. Although you did ask a good question, though, Sunchild.
It's a good question, and
yeah,
that's exactly the right question to ask.
Just another question.
Nah, you're done. You listen. Hey,
Gotta respect the
Sunchild, you're done.
platform, Sunchild.
You're
Come
done,
on.
Sunchild. Listen, I respect the fact, Sunchild, that you actually went and tried to find some of his sources in debate. I respect that. So you might get another question, but not right this second. I'm listening to somebody else, but I like the fact that you actually read and did that. That's right. And I know, and somewhere along the line, you'll mess that all up. But right now, I appreciate it, bro.
No, it's a good question.
Absolutely.
And especially since I often forget that I take for granted how things work in my field. And so, people who are outside the field, like if you're going to find a quotation of Theopompus, that can be a real challenge because it is complicated how to get to that source. So anyway, yeah, the advice that I gave is the way to do it.
All right, Marcus, what's going on, man? Pseudo Killer Official, man. What's good? How you doing, brother?
I'm good. How you?
Man, good to have you, man. What's up with you, man? Pseudo Killer Official, what's good?
Yeah, I'm enjoying the show. He's doing his thing right now. I had a small question for him. I wanted to touch more on some of the methods of, or at least the philosophical thoughts of epistemology and methodological naturalism when it comes to just science and the scientific method.
Oh, okay. I got a link for you. I got to throw this in. All right. So I have my own particular axe to grind on that question. So I have an article. It's called "Naturalism is Not an Axiom of the Sciences, but a Conclusion of Them." I'm going to throw it in private chat. I hope,
All right.
Tiffany, you can throw it into the general.
Yeah, Marcus did that too.
That article kind of answered. It was written to answer exactly your kind of question. I don't think that science should adopt methodological naturalism for an a priori epistemological reason. I think it's just a heuristic based on the fact that supernatural hypotheses have failed a million times. Natural hypotheses have succeeded. It's always been naturalist hypotheses that succeed. So that the prior probability favoring naturalistic hypotheses is very high. So in other words, it's very fruitful. Like you're going to be more successful as a scientist and find more things if you get rid of the supernatural hypothesis, because that's an unfruitful methodology, because we've tried that and it just never succeeds. However, that does not mean we should just adamantly rule out supernaturalist hypotheses. I do think that science could prove the supernatural. You just need the evidence. And so it's still possible. So I think generally what I think of as methodological naturalism is just the tendency to not waste our money on useless research that we know is not going to go anywhere. It's just targeted research on hypotheses that we know have a high chance of turning out to be true. And that just happens to disfavor supernaturalism because the evidence has disfavored supernaturalism. And I've written a lot about what would be different, like what would be different about the world if that was the other way around. So like, what if we lived in a world where the supernatural was true?
Be in trouble.
Well, science would look very different, right? Like we would still be able to study it scientifically. If you look at like Harry Potter, the whole storyline of Harry Potter, can you imagine if a scientist got through the secret doorway in the train station and could go study like wizardry and whatnot? Like that would be like it, right? Like that's why they have to invent this elaborate scheme where this conspiracy where they keep magic from being discovered, which is implausible. But if you could, like, you could scientifically study magic in the Harry Potter world if that was true, like if that was the actual world. So I don't think science can't study the supernatural or that it's some sort of shouldn't. I just think it's unfruitful because the supernatural has been so thoroughly disproved that there's no point in continuing to research it. But you know, I don't know. We're open-minded enough that we'll allow if someone can come up with evidence to do it. I don't know if that answers your question though. So I kind of went off on my own tangent on that.
Yeah, that was sufficient enough. I'll read the article. I got it in the back chat.
Cool. Awesome.
Okay. All right. Okay, hold on. Sabio, what's your question, man? Welcome to the Community of Skeptics.
Peace. What up with it? Peace,
How you
Dr.
doing,
Carrier. Me and you are Facebook friends. You have sent me some information on Christianity.
Nice.
One of my questions is about this misconception people keep trying to say Paul was mistaken as an Egyptian. I keep telling them that it was Antonius Pius. Can you please explain to them how that mistake was put into Acts?
You got to give me more data. I've not heard of this story. So what is this theory that Paul is an Egyptian?
That Paul, that in Acts they mistake Paul as the Egyptian.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah, yes, excellent. Right. So, and what are people saying about this? So they think that Paul therefore was an Egyptian. Is that what you're thinking?
Yes.
The thing you're challenging?
Yes, they think Paul is an Egyptian.
Okay, so oh man, there's so many layers to this question. Well, the first scandalous point is that Acts is fiction, so it's bullshit, right? It's propaganda, and so it's based a lot on Josephus, and the Egyptian is one of the messianic pretenders that he talks about. And so there's a bunch of these guys. There's Theudas and the Egyptian and so on. Now, the book of Acts plays on this a lot. So like there's a speech of Gamaliel where he talks about these guys. Theudas, I even think he mentions the Egyptian. Maybe I can't remember if he mentions specifically the Egyptian, but he mentions Theudas and so on. So the book of Acts is built on referencing these messianic heroes that come up in Josephus, one of whom was just called the Egyptian. Now, the Egyptian was supposedly a militant. Like the reason we know about him is that he gathered sort of what was believed to be a military force. It might not actually have been, but the Romans believed it was. And so there was a massive military action against the Egyptian and his people and kind of like annihilated his movement. This therefore became a model for military messianism. And therefore the question of Paul being mistaken for the Egyptian is people mistaking this pacifist advocate of Jesus as the Messiah, mistaking him as this sort of this threatening, supposedly militaristic Messiah. So it didn't really have anything to do with Egypt. That was not relevant to the whole story. It's just that there's a particular person called the Egyptian, who, if he was a messianic figure in Judaism, he must have been Jewish. He might have been Jewish from Egypt. There was a huge Jewish community in Egypt at the time. But it might also reference the fact that sort of claim that he was a Moses figure. Moses is supposedly the Egyptian, etc. We don't really know. We actually don't know why they were called the Egyptian, what relationship they had to Egypt or whatever. But the book of Acts inventing this fake story about Paul being mistaken for the Egyptian is really a sort of meant to be a fictional narrative about mistaking different messianists. So in the context, it would be, like someone mistaking him for a particular figure today, like mistaking him for Donald Trump, doesn't mean that he comes from New York. It means that there's something that Donald Trump represents, morally and politically, that he's been mistaken for. The role of the location where they come from is not the thing that's relevant to the story. When people are reading the book of Acts back then, they would know you're talking about, oh, I know that the Egyptian is that guy who did that thing in Judea that one time. So it just is the name of this particular figure. It's not meant to call up any kind of reference to Egypt. And of course, the story doesn't say that they mistake him as the Egyptian because he's Egyptian, right? Like, it doesn't reference any evidence that he came from Egypt. And it's not impossible that he did. It's just we don't have any evidence that he did.
All right.
Does that answer the question? I hope it does.
Oh, God.
Yeah, it does. For
All
me,
right, so
because I'm
we got-
being understanding. Thank you.
Oh man, what happened to DQ? You was up here, DQ. Who was up here? Oh, Cedric. What happened to Cedric?
And we're at our 10-minute mark, just to let you all know.
I bet you do know that.
Yep.
Come on now. I'm on top of that. Relax.
Right.
What happened to man? Okay, that person's not coming through right there. Come on, man. What happened to you, Cedric? DQ, what's up? Where you at? Okay. Hey man, look, y'all listen to the Community Skeptics, man. We got a few minutes left in the interview, man. Man, we having a great discourse, high level conversation, man, with Richard Carrier, man. Very, very educational. Y'all can go back and listen to the download, man. It's important to have this type of information. We had a great discussion. And so we can go back. I'm waiting. So you don't have a copy of the debate yet? You didn't get a copy of the debate yet, Richard?
What do you mean, like a DVD or something?
Yeah, well, not they don't do DVDs. The more you have a chance to watch it again, right?
Oh no, I don't usually rewatch my debates.
Okay, once it's over with, it's over with, huh?
Although, yeah, if it's not publicly available, I would like a copy of it. So just for my archives.
Right. Man, I had a good.
That reminds me, though. There's a point that I was going to bring up when Juju was talking earlier. To tell another story, which is when I debated Mike Licona for the second time. And Mike Licona is another Christian apologist, very different from William Lane Craig. When we debated the second time, we had kind of come to the agreement that the goal of the debate, we were going to do. We had like the podium sort of combative debate for one round, but the rest of the debate was us sitting in comfy chairs. And we agreed that the goal of the debate would be to understand why the other person believes what they do. So rather than winning the debate, the goal was understanding, like, why do you believe what you believe?
Okay.
So that I can understand that. And that was a really great debate. Like, the rest of the debate was awesome. But the audience hated it. Well, at least the Christian audience hated it because they wanted to see Licona like destroy Richard Carrier, right? Like, they wanted cage match. They wanted UFC, right? Like, they wanted some sort of like battle or whatever. They didn't like understanding what kind of namby-pamby stuff is that. And that kind of illustrated, I think, like what people expect, like the idea that people expect debates to be battle, war,
Right.
victory, etc. Whereas it's actually way more interesting when it has a specific focus of understanding, like, why do you believe what you believe? Like, if you put it that way, it's not combative, it's more exploratory and therefore more informative. And so anyway, that your question earlier reminded me of that story, and I just wanted to tell it for that reason.
All right.
Absolutely. Thank you.
DQ, what's good, man?
How y'all
Pseudo Killer
doing? How
Official. How
everybody
you
doing?
doing, brother?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. How you doing, Mr. Carey?
Doing well.
I'm good. How you doing? My name, real name is Daquan Hampton. I'm an entrepreneur, businessman. I'm a member of Pseudo Killers. I attended Abilene Christian University, and one of the main things we had to do my freshman year, we had to take a Life and Teachings of Jesus Christ course. And that course was very interesting because there was a lot of different viewpoints. A lot of people who was just coming into Christianity, had their different viewpoints on it. But one thing I wanted to talk to you about, because I watched one of your lectures, was how you came up with how you came to the conclusion that the Christianity is basically a mixture of Zoroastrianism from the Persian conquest, different elements during the Greek conquest and the Roman conquest, and the mystery cults combined.
Right.
And I see the main thing that you talk about is syncretism, and syncretism of henotheism. I think I said it correctly.
Yeah.
Henotheism. Right. Yeah. Basically, they was turning polytheism into mono. But
right.
One thing that caught my attention, which I loved, was I was always under the assumption when you talk about heaven and hell that the concept of hell came in from Dante Alighieri, the Italian.
Yeah.
Today
you're right. Like, most people's idea of it is heavily infected by that. But yeah, right. Back then, obviously, it didn't.
Yeah, obviously it didn't, because when I started reading up on the Zoroastrianism, that's basically the whole thing of good and evil, dark and light, God versus Satan. And they had tales of basically hell, river of fire, things of that sort. So, that was a light bulb to me, because I always was just stuck on just saying hell came from Dante. But
right.
Yeah, but that was just one of the main things I did want to say. I really didn't have a question. I appreciate everything that you do, and continue to keep doing what you got to do, brother.
Who won that debate, DQ? Who won that debate?
Between Richard Carey and Jabari?
Yeah, who won that debate?
In quote unquote conscious community, he didn't bring sources. In real life, like I say, when you are an expert in your field, you are the source, basically. So exactly. Richard Carey did what he had to do and handle this business. So yeah, Richard Carey came out with that win.
Yeah. Well, as GODKILLA said, like I actually did present sources in the debate. But for anyone who's confused about that, the article that I just put up on the debate has tons of sources. That's everything you need. So yeah, no longer a valid complaint.
No, not that. Top Dollar, what's good, man? What's on your mind?
Hey,
Talk to us.
What's good? What's good, Ankh? Everybody, how you guys doing? Dr. Richard Carrier, how you doing?
Yeah, great.
I have just one or two questions.
No, you only got one question.
we got 4 minutes actually. So
yeah, you got one question.
I
want
appreciate
your sunchild back in there, but go ahead.
Okay, I appreciate it. I watched a documentary PBS from Jesus to Christ. Mr. Richard Carrier, did you watch that documentary? And if you did, you did not.
Keep going though. Tell me what your question is.
My question is, well, from the documentary, it was coming from the point of Jesus as being a kind of a normal person or a real person, and how the religion kind of gathered around that and kind of turned Jesus, the person Jesus, into a Christ figure. And I just wanted to know, what were your thoughts on that.
Yeah.
And Ankh, if you've seen the
That's a good
documentary, you know what I'm talking about.
Yep, I've seen it.
It's a good question. As a rule, I generally don't watch those documentaries because they're too 101. I did one recently because someone paid me to actually write an official report for the UK government on Jarmaid McCullough's thing. You can find that on my blog, but normally I don't bother. However, the PBS documentary, based on your description, I think that sounds correct because that's the mainstream view, and I think it's entirely plausible, right? So, like, if Jesus existed, that has to be the case, right? It has to be something ordinary and mundane about him that it got exploded later. And a model is like the Rastafarian religion, where you have Rastafari, Haile Selassie, ordinary guy, but they have these wild legends and this grandiose envision of him as the Messiah. And the Rastafarians do, and so that it has to be something like that. Like, so if Jesus existed, it had to be something more like that. Is what happened, and totally plausible. And there's a lot of different theories and models of how to reconstruct a historical Jesus in the academic field. So that there's tons of them. I do recommend, even though I don't think it's completely flawless, I do recommend Bart Ehrman's book, How Jesus Became God. Apart from the few minor things I do have a review of it on my blog if you want to know what I disagree with, but I mostly agree with everything he points out there. That I think, like, if Jesus existed, this is the model. This is how it happened. Anyway, that's my recommendation. So yeah, I think totally a plausible position to take.
Mm-hmm. All right, where we at? Yeah, I guess we up against it. Sunchild, man, I apologize, man. We up against it, man. Look, Richard Curry, look, I appreciate you coming through, man. I enjoyed the conversation. I'm sure we'll do this again.
Can I get my last question in?
No, you can't.
Sunchild.
Mr. Carrier, may I, Doctor?
Absolutely not,
Sunchild.
Sunchild.
Yeah, you done. I tell you what, go ahead and drop $50 in that Cash App, and you can ask that because we can extend the time. Money talk, bullshit walk. What's up? All right, then. I thought not. You just a chatty patty. Hey, look, I appreciate everybody coming through, man. It's been a great interview. Appreciate you, Richard, man. Hope we can get you back in here again. I know we can. Money talk.
Been awesome. Love
right?
it.
Been a great conversation. A lot of unexpected information, man. We appreciate your critique on the debate itself. I'm pretty sure this interview right here will be talked about for a while, and we just the ones to do it, man. With that, man, appreciate you. Look, we're gonna have an after show. I'm gonna go ahead and let you out, Richard, man. I appreciate you, man. We're gonna hold you for your time, and we got your blogs in there, man. Go check out his blogs, get some of his books, go and read some of the sources. As a matter of fact, I enjoyed just reading the sources. Right, excellent books. Appreciate you, man. With that, man, we out. All right, so yeah, man, we're gonna hit that. Man, hit that Cash App on your way out the door, man. I appreciate it, man.
Now you see why I could not ever listen to the people who say Egypt Christianity was stolen from Egypt, right?
Yeah, they dumb. Hey, look, yeah, we out of here, man. We're gonna go over and do that critique, man. And let me go out with this. What we going out with? We're gonna go out with what we came in with, man. Do something different for y'all, man. Y'all know what it is, man. We chilling on this one. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Lil Rock. I grew up on this. Y'all tripping. All day. All day.
Not that box song. You could at least get some Bon Jovi or somebody.
Yeah. Don't worry about the Bon Jovi. We're going to set the show up for the after show. Let's get right over to the after show.
I'm going to have to send you my rock song.
Yeah, send that to me. Because I love
it. Rock song. I got you.
Good. Send it to me, DQ.
Ooh, DQ.
Hey, who gonna set up that? Let's set up that that show. Let me get y'all out of here. Miss Tiff, you gonna set that up?
You want it here?
Yeah, that after show. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
All right. Okay. All right, man. Hey, y'all was listening to the Community Skeptics, man. I appreciate everybody came through, man. It's a powerful one. We're going to hit that after show, man. We're going to let all the chatty patties on, man. All right, we had some critique on the interview, man. Appreciate everybody that came through. All right, appreciate you, Miss Tiff. Appreciate all your help. Appreciate all the pseudo killers, man. Shout out to Brass, man. And y'all know what it is, man. Black African Power, man. Community skeptics on deck, man. Pseudo killers official. And with that, we out.